We're streaming. Awesome. Hello, everyone who is joining us or watching us in the future. This is Tales of SwordFall, and we're presenting Adventures in Game Mastering. I am Paul. I run this. You guys probably, hopefully, know who I am by now. And I am joined by a guest tonight. Who are ya?
And my name is Dwayne, no one of consequence.
Well, it's awesome to have you here.
Thanks
That's all
for
I
having
had
me,
to
Paul.
say. Yep. And just to name drop, we're both part of the Master the Game group, which Gaming with Juice has set up. Pretty awesome group on Facebook. Check out Juice's site, which I can't remember off the top of my head now. But if you, I think, look up on Google Gaming with Juice, Juce, you can find him pretty easily.
Yeah, and the Facebook group is Master of the Game. He also has, he's got both a group for open discussion and I don't know what you would call the other format, but
Yeah,
the group.
and he also has a YouTube channel and stuff. RPGJUCE.com is his thing, so look him up. He does blogs and stuff. He's an awesome guy. But we're not here to talk about our crush on Juice. We're here to talk about campaigns.
Well, I wouldn't hold him responsible for any of the shenanigans that go on here either.
Nah, I wouldn't. But I like to promote him because he's awesome.
Sure.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, campaigns. What are they? We should probably define this first, especially if you're that first time GM and you're like, okay, I got to figure out a campaign. Where do I start? What is a campaign? For me, in my definition, a campaign is the overarching theme or problem that is in your game. Um, for me, I like to run games that are like story arcs and then one overall like theme. And it just helps the characters develop a little bit more, all that. Um, yeah, that's my definition. How about you, Dwayne?
Well, call me Captain Pedantic, but a campaign is a series of military operations intended to achieve a goal. And so when it comes to gaming, it's as you said, you've identified what a goal is, and even if that goal is as simple as, hey, I'm getting together with a bunch of friends and we're going to have fun, or if it's we are going to conquer the Dragon Queen, and then you put together these series of operations, or in the gaming terms, a series of gaming sessions in order to work towards that goal.
I think that was a little bit more well defined than mine, but hey, you know, this is why I have a second person here. um, yeah. So, if I actually look at the questions that we prepared beforehand, um, what usually attracts you or inspires you to do a new campaign, Dwayne?
Well, usually it's somebody that I know saying, hey, I've got a game that I want to pull together. Are you interested in playing? And I say, yes.
That's a good answer.
Because as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, I am more of a player than I am a game master.
Yeah. Well, do you ever come up with ideas and you're like, hey man, I thought this would be a cool idea for a campaign. Do you think you could run it?
I don't usually foist my ideas on other people in that way unless they're asking. But if you're asking, do I ever come up with ideas on my own that I think, oh, I'd like to do that someday, or I'd like to run that someday, or I'd like to play in that someday, then yeah, it's nearly an endless list.
Cool. What are what are the how do I word this? What are some of the ideas that you've had, let's just say recently, that you think would be cool to explore, or cool to play in?
Um, for a while now, Rogue is my favorite class, and I've thought it would be really fun to play in likely a city campaign with all rogues. And someday maybe that'll happen where a bunch of people that I know are interested in playing a rogue in an all rogue campaign. But it may never happen. I just think it would be kind of fun because, especially in 5e, rogues are really well diversified. The only thing that they would lack is healing, but as far as the rest of it, they've got magic covered, they've got social interactions covered, they've got high damage output covered. They're dodgy all over the place for getting out of the way and damage mitigation. And so, I think as long as the GM is putting together something that's appropriate, um, an all rogue campaign could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, especially with the new stuff in Xanathar's guide. Just some of those, not paths, archetypes. Yes, are actually
Yeah,
pretty
well,
cool.
whether it's what type of rogue you're playing or, um, you mentioned Xanathar's guide, there's a lot of stuff in there for building out the personality of your character
Oh
that
yeah,
could really fit well with, I mean, because I said rogues are, you can build a highly charismatic rogue. Um, and so with some of the roguish archetypes, you could say, well, okay, I want to make the um, the James Bond kind of character, or you could say, I want to make a Sherlock Holmes or a Moriarty. Um, but then looking at the different, I forget what they're called in here. I'll just turn to the page. Adversaries. You can
hmm.
say, hey, I'm going to roll a d6 on here, or you can come up with an adversary of your own. The benefactors are also listed, guilty pleasures are also listed, and so it gives your character more character. Where
Yeah,
you could say this isn't just a stat sheet that I'm rolling dice on. This is a character that I want to build story around.
and then people who want to get away from 5e, if they ever want to, there are games like Blades in the Dark, where essentially that is a game where you're all playing a group of rogues, basically. It's a pretty interesting game. It's recently came out. I'm actually playing a um, what is it? It's a reskin of it called Scum and Villainy. So it basically takes that idea and sets you in space. So kind of what is that recent fantasy flight? Outer Rim stuff
Okay.
going on, smugglers and all that. But it's using the Blades in the Dark system, and in my opinion, a pretty solid system. So lots of room for role play and all that.
Nice.
Yeah, actually, I would not mind trying to run a game using either Blades in the Dark or Scum and Villainy after actually seeing how it's ran. Then, yeah.
Now,
But then
what about
again,
you?
like,
Since you asked me, what comes to you for inspiration for a new campaign?
yeah, for new campaigns, man, uh, movies. First of all, like sometimes I'll just see a movie and I'll be like, that would be interesting to see in, the setting of D&D or whatever, and see what players will do with it. Like one idea I just had kicking around in my head. This is just popped into my head like a few days ago. something like with the Fast and the Furious movies in D&D. How would that work? How would players react to it? And what kind of antics would like just happen? That's interesting to me. And
Well, maybe I should watch one of those someday. That's a series I've never seen any of.
oh yeah, they're you only need to see a few of them to really get the gist of the series. Fast cars and people who may or may not be robbing banks. It depends on the movie. Um, I had a friend who was very much into that because they were super into cars. So, yeah. Another idea that I had was a Sky Pirate campaign. That's always been one of my goals. Just get a solid group together and get that going because Sky Pirates sounds cool. Also, I always have the whole. I always like the aesthetic of like floating islands.
Okay.
So yeah. Um,
Yeah. Who was it? Jim Butcher. He has a new book out that I haven't read it yet, but it sort of seems rather Sky Pirate like. Are you familiar with the book?
no, no, I'm not.
I will just see if I can find it while we're chatting along here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like we've been having a little bit of audio problems since we started recording.
Yeah, that might be on my end mostly. Probably too many
Yeah,
people getting onto Netflix all at once.
either that or it's just the process of recording. It's just making little glitches, and I'm missing, I don't know, maybe 40 to 50% of what you're saying
Oh no, am I better now?
at the moment. But we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Yeah, just tell me if things start going. I noticed my streaming health bar was kind of flashing for a little bit, so hopefully we are okay. I was closing a lot of windows that were taking up a lot of things.
Yeah, you're not any better now.
Oh no.
It's fine.
Yeah,
We'll muddle through.
I'm just. Hmm.
Aeronauts Windlass was the book.
Oh, something I will have to write down. Alright.
I will send you a link.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Yeah,
Okay.
so Sky Pirates. Yeah, there was a game I was playing in a few years ago. Pathfinder was the gaming system, and the GM came up with the idea of uh, basically a magical gem powering ships, and off we went, sailing through the skies.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think mine had to do with magical runes that had only so much charge to them, so the players would have to keep track of like how far they were actually going and all that. So little tiny challenges here and there just to keep them on their toes.
Lest they get stranded. Good
Yep.
idea.
Or they crash into the surface world, which wasn't a friendly place.
Well, and it never is.
No, no. I mean, why would you have floating islands if the surface world was nice?
Yeah, and we are adventurers, aren't we?
Yeah, that we are. Let's
And
see.
I know this isn't necessarily a campaign specific idea, but recently I've been thinking, what would it be like to have a setting where humans were the rarity and that would probably be, um, let's say, thousands of years earlier in a typical gaming setting, where you could say, well, okay, so we've got the elves and the dwarves, but humans are a new thing here.
Yeah, that would actually be a pretty interesting setting and a campaign, especially if you're a group looking to these weird non-magical creatures that are just coming out of the woodworks.
Ah, they're breeding like rabbits.
Yep. That would be, like, in my opinion, that would probably be a really interesting campaign. And as you know, I think most people would run it like you're humans and these people are trying to stop you from basically existing, but flipping it the other way, you're trying to stop this like new menace from happening. That would be pretty interesting.
Sure. Or maybe you're not stopping them, you're exploring them. It's like, what are these children here doing? There are lots of them, and they seem rather curious. Maybe we'll just leave them alone.
Yeah.
And then, discover the horrors of humanity as time goes on.
Yep. So, now this is going to be from your player's perspective, which is awesome. Um, how do you usually start off a new campaign? Like, do you have anything specific that you do for yourself to help you out, or is there a lot of discussions with the person who's running it, or anything like that?
From the perspective of a player, that's got to be 100% driven by the game master. If the game master says, I have this idea, this setting, this everything put together, and I want you to understand enough of it to make a character that we can insert into this game world, then great, got to go with that. But if the game master, well, for example, I'm starting 2 days ago. I sat down with a couple of players, just a two-player campaign. It's a husband and wife, and I said I'd be happy to run a game for you, but I want to know what your characters are going to be like, what you would like to do, what your interests are, not only you as a player, but the interests that your character would have, so that I can build a campaign starting in on the small, and say, well, okay, so you're a forest gnome, and you're a wizard. How did you become a wizard? And what does being a gnome mean to you? And build from there to say, well, these are the things that you've indicated on your sheet, that your character is like, which means those are things that you're interested in exploring. And so build it out from there. And then it depends on the players. Like I could say, well, I'll come up with random town names and random NPC names, or I could turn it over to them and say, so you've got this need to go to the neighboring town. What do you think would be a good name for that town? Because I would love to build the entire world and setting and campaign together. Because I'm not, when I'm running a game, I'm not sitting down at the table to be the storyteller. I'm sitting down to build a story with some friends.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way actually. When I start a new campaign, I always have a session zero, especially since I have been expanding my wings, jumping past friends and going to like complete strangers and being like, "Hey, do you want to play a game?" And I'll usually have a few like vague ideas of what I'd like to see in the game, of course, but it's always interesting to see what expectations some people have when they're sitting down at the table and they're like, yeah, well, I like to see this game a little bit more fantastic and fairy tale like and less grimdark, and perfectly fine like things to say. Um,
Sure.
and yeah, I love playing games a little bit more like Grimm's fairy tales, if that makes sense. Where a lot of things are either trying to bargain with you or ultimately trying to eat you. I think it's just interesting, and it starts to make people wonder, oh, this merchant's coming up to me. Is he like actually going to sell me something or try to stuff me in his sack? So,
It's interesting. This morning I was listening to a podcast called The Game Master's Journey. And in the podcast, he was talking, as part of his series, he's going through different books. And he was looking at the Dungeon Master Guide. And the section that he was looking at in this episode was random encounters. And
uh-huh.
I've never been a big fan of a truly random encounter because I prefer encounters to be meaningful in some way.
Yeah.
And he had a really solid argument that a random encounter can be meaningful for a lot of different reasons, even if it's just the players are sitting there hearing you roll the dice. And so it's giving them motivation to move forward before the dice roll against them and a random encounter occurs.
Yeah.
He, he,
Oh, go ahead.
he also brought up a good argument that um, in a reasonable game world or story, for example, um, in The Lord of the Rings, when the hobbits are first leaving the Shire, Frodo turns to his friends and says, "Get off the road, get off the road," because there's a Nazgul coming.
Yeah.
And that's an opponent that he knows they can't defeat. And so the point he was making is that in a random encounter, you can have that, oh no, here comes a dragon, we're level 2, let's get off the road. And I think it's probably a good idea to be presenting things to your characters that they can't overcome by combat.
Oh yeah.
So you're encouraging to build story in, let's have a social interaction with this encounter, or let's just run away and hide from this encounter, because realistically, you're not going to be able to defeat everything that comes at you. So stop being a murder hobo and find another way.
Yeah, I was about to mention the Taking 20 video today that was posted about 7 reasons why your players might have hobo murder characters. And part of it was the whole deal with social interaction. And if you don't, reward your players for, you know, actually talking to or having some kind of like social situation and then getting some kind of reward for it, all they're going to do is hack and slash and gain the XP from that. And I always like to run games where characters, like if a player can think of a good way within their character to get out of a situation, I'll let them have that. I mean, I have in this actual channel, Tales of Swordfall, Horatio is a bard, and the first 2 times there was a mugger lurking in the streets of the large city they were in, he actually intimidated them. Um, with the full intent on my part of having some kind of like small skirmish happen, but he's like, no, I'm gonna look at this guy. I'm gonna give him that look of "don't mess with me," and I'm like, okay, let's see what the dice do, and yeah, he narrated it in such a way that I was and rolled a significant number that I was just like, yeah, you avoid the combat and the mugger actually leaves the area. So technically he helped that area that they were traveling in become a little bit safer.
Yeah, and that's worth full experience from my perspective.
Yeah, and
An
I keep
encounter doesn't have to be combat.
no, it never has. I mean, I like encounters that are sometimes like of wit. I played out the situation where in one of my real life games where um, player was playing a spy and he was countering another spy, and they basically had a cat fight in front of the employer that they were both keeping an eye on, and it was very enjoyable because it was a back and forth situation where we were doing it in character, and ultimately um, the NPC that the character was fighting with got flustered, ran out of the room, and the character ended up gaining some like valuable information within that like snippet, and after that too.
Nice.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
rewards sometimes don't always have to be XP. They can be plot driving devices, etc., etc. That's for a
Yeah. So
whole different podcast, though.
yeah, definitely. I was just wondering, to pull back onto topic, what else do you do to start a campaign?
Um, as I mentioned, session zero. That's always an important one.
But are
Make
you using a session zero to gather information from the players, as what I had said for what
yes,
their interests are?
yep.
Okay.
And also make sure like that I'm going to be running something that they're fully comfortable with. Making sure there's nothing that's going to like pull them out of the game, or something that's going to like disgust them or anything like that. I want my table and my campaigns to be like 100%. Everyone's just going to be calm and having fun. And that's usually what I try to get out of all of my sessions and all my campaigns. Um, Also, uh, I'm a huge believer in players actually helping out, and like if a if it seems right that the character has an arch nemesis or someone following them, or some kind of presence, work with the player to hash that out. And sometimes the players will come up with brilliant ideas, or even more sinister ideas that I can think of. Um, like
Exploit.
yeah, yes, an exploit. Um, I was trying to think of a good example, and I don't want to present any spoilers because I know some of the players actually listen to this, hoping that it would drop something. But in one of my
Oh.
real life games, had a player and they were connected to a basically a mafia like entity, and I'm like, okay, give me like three names of the head top people, and we'll just play along with that. And the player was more than happy to like, oh yeah, here's three names. This guy's the head. This guy's the head of their muscle, and this guy takes care of the legal side. I'm like, cool, I can use that. And sometimes that just helps take it takes the campaign sometimes in a place where you're not going to expect it, but anytime you yourself can be surprised by things that happen in your campaign that you weren't expecting, I think that's an appropriate way to actually be both a player and a person who's running the game, be it a narrator or a GM or whatever.
Okay. So what do you do then? You've had your session zero. You've sat down with the players. They've given you some good ideas about where they want to go. Um, so like, then you've got all these ideas pulled together, and maybe you've got, well, odds are good you've got some sort of setting that you're going to drop it all into. but where do you take it from there? How do you do the next step of preparation for your campaign?
The next step of preparation. Session
Well,
one, of
beginning
course.
as it is, not just the session 0, but
Yeah,
okay,
that.
now we're taking our first few steps.
Yep. I tend to make a list of the characters and what they're connected to, even if it's just like a brief mental list. And like, okay, um, Juan is a bard, and he has gambling problems, and a mob boss is after him. That's something I can introduce within in the first session to present some kind of problem that he's going to try to get away from. Cool. And also, it could lead that character to be looking for some kind of job, or even looking for protection of a group, if it's not a well-established adventuring group, to actually stick with that group.
Okay.
That's just an example. I was trying to think of like maybe two more, but not off the top of my head right now. Wow. But it's things like that where, we're taking the overall theme of there's a lich controlling the area, and it's going to be one way or another the group going to stop it, but not at the moment because they're like level 3 characters, right? And so I would try to think of a series of story arcs to get them closer and discover that, hey, there's this big bad out there, and get them involved somehow. And I usually have a lot of prep at the beginning of a campaign of just things that can happen, and I brainstorm a lot. But once I actually start getting into it, it's light prep where I'm making sure I have enough for like the next story arc and the next connection, but leave enough room that the players can actually have agency, basically, to help direct the game where they want to. Perhaps this group, isn't like turns out to be a whole bunch of shady people who want to make, shady deals, scam people and stuff, and they don't want to be like the atypical heroic here. Well, I'll try to find a way to fit the campaign where, there's a lich looming somewhere in the background, and perhaps they're, indirectly working for that guy. That could be one thing. Or if they are the atypical heroic group, uh, running it so they, slowly find out that a lot of the bad things they have been doing, or the city or the kingdom has been encountering, is because of this guy.
Okay.
So
basically, after you've made connections between the characters in the world, then you're coming up with something for them to do.
Yeah.
Whether it's escape the whatever's after them, or pursue the something that's causing trouble for somebody else, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. I just need to take notes because, as I said, I play more than GM, so I need to know these things.
If you get something out of this, if anyone gets anything out of these live streams and podcasts, I feel like that this channel is doing its job. So please take as many notes as you want and pick my brain as much as you want. So I'm very much one of those guys who I'll start off with like some pretty strong prep in the very beginning, but then it's not that I lose steam, it's I find that the less like structure I have, the more fun people usually have.
Sorry, can you say that again? The less.
Oh, the less prep that I have, usually the more fun the players end up having.
Why is that?
I think part of it is I have kind of an obsessive personality, and I know that now. And so if I over prep, I tend to get obsessive about it. And I explained this in one of the previous live streams. When I was younger, I used to be that one GM who would make like 3 separate languages for a campaign, even though it wasn't really needed. And
Yeah, but it was your version of having fun. So, yeah, I can understand that. So, I think what you're saying is that the more spontaneity that is available, the easier it is for them to participate in the building of the story and the telling of the story and just the game world.
yeah,
But I mean, and I've run into DMs that do this before too, where you've got the guy that's like, no, this is my story that I'm telling, and you guys are characters in it, and this is the path you're taking, and that's no fun for anybody.
no,
Well, except the overly controlling GM that is wanting to tell his story and nobody else's.
yeah. And another thing I do at the end of every session, or I at least try to, is something I picked up from the from other GMs. It's called Good, Bad, and Ugly, where at the end of each session, I have the players just tell me something they liked, something they thought was not so good, and basically the harsh truth of something that went terribly wrong, and they're like, "Hey, dude, don't ever do that again." And that usually helps me not only refocus of what I'm doing, but also refocus where the campaign is going and where my prep should be, if I have any prep.
I like that because you're taking that moment to strike while the iron is hot in getting good feedback from them, which even if it's something that yeah, I knew that that was running long in that one spot and the combat was just going on and on and on, but I was kind of stuck in it and needed resolution to happen, but the rolls were so low it just wasn't working. And so there's nothing you can really do about it, and it's something that you already knew about. It's probably good for the players to know that you care enough to ask. So that seems like a really good tip to carry with me. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and also once again, it gives the players a voice of what's happening within the game. Um, I'll probably just say this over and over again. Your players will help you out no matter what. Even if they don't think they're helping you out, they're helping you out. And having that interaction, that social interaction in a social game of, you're presenting this world and they are controlling characters in this world, it makes them feel like they have more agency. And which, in fact, you are giving them more agency, being like, how did I mess up tonight? Please tell me.
Mm-hmm.
One thing.
Well, as long as it doesn't feed upon itself so that it becomes, oh yeah, you really do suck, and we're not coming back.
Yeah, well, if you do have players dropping out, you might want to reconsider what you're actually doing too. So yeah, and that's a harsh reality, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, one rule I usually have during the good, bad, and ugly, I just listen. I don't say anything else. I just let the people have their say, and I try not to like defend any of my actions or anything. I just listen and I make sure I'm hearing everything correctly.
That seems good.
Oh yeah, it's it's one of those things that I know some people have a super hard time with. You know,
Well, the temptation would be to justify.
yeah, exactly.
Well,
For
yeah,
me,
I knew that was happening, and I'm going to justify it by saying this. Well,
yeah, for
you're
me,
invalidating the response.
yeah, for me, it's like trying to justify my actions. I want to, but learning how to actually listen is a skill that every game master needs to have. Just sit back, listen, take it in.
Hmm. Yeah, good advice.
Yeah.
Solid.
So
Yeah. I see your next question here on your list is how long do you think campaigns should last? Do you have a hard and fast rule on this, or what do you do with this?
I personally don't have a hard and fast rule. Usually, um, like I know of games that have had a group for like what I think I've read one that was like 30, 40 years or something like that ever since like the first D&D ever came out. And in my mind that's amazing, but I'm pretty sure they didn't have the like one solid campaign for all that time.
Well,
Because well,
odds are they're going to get married somewhere in there and have some interruptions.
yeah. Well, and also like character wise, I mean, I think every time you like retire a character or um, a character even dies, it changes the campaign like ever so slightly because the group dynamic is also going to change, unless you have Ragnar Ragnar's barbarian's third cousin coming back in with the same personality. You know.
Oh, yeah, I played with a guy once that had he only had one character. His character's name was Gar, and he was a fighter, and every new game he got into, he made Gar, and it was just embarrassing. I mean, like sometimes he would show up with his level 11 character, and we're like, "Oh no, we're all level 3 in this one." Oh, well, I thought it was the other one because he couldn't keep them straight. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I've met a few people that are like, "Yep, this is James the Bard. He's my go-to character." And I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah. Branch out a little, you say. He's like,
Yeah,
okay, I'll change his name from James to Jim.
or is Jimmy better? That gives him a more youthful name. Yeah,
Hmm.
there's players like that, and you know, it doesn't make me angry or anything. It more just, I think it disappoints me a little because I believe that everybody has some kind of like imagination, and the more they act on it, I think the more fun they would actually have. But some people can't get comfortable enough to get past that point.
Hmm. With this particular guy with his character named Gar, I started playing in a game with him once a few years ago, and he knew that I would tend to use various voices for my characters. And right in the first session, he said, if you expect me to use a voice, forget it, you're wrong, it'll never happen. And I'm like, hey, no problem. I'm just here to have fun just like you. You have fun your way, I'll have fun my way. Well, the first time my character started talking, everybody busted a gut and started laughing. I don't even remember which character I was using or what voice or accent or intonation, but everybody thought it was hilarious. And then after the laughter stopped and everybody calmed down and got a little bit used to the voice, one of the other guys at the table, he picked up a voice too. He's just like, yeah, I'm just trying it out. And it was great. It was brilliant. And after a few sessions, even this guy with his Gar character was throwing in a little bit of vocal differentiation in order to join in with everybody because he was seeing that everybody was having fun with this and he wanted that too. So I have hope for people like that.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of number one rules for game masters, and one of the number one rules is never give up. Well, never give up hope, basically. Uh,
That's don't give up hope in what?
just in your players.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah, I mean, some people start off a little rough, especially if they're first time players, and unless they're like being very disruptive or whatever, player problems. Nah. Um, some people just need time to loosen up and find their own thing. Like what you said with the voices. Once people started getting a little bit more comfortable and seeing that you were sticking yourself out there, other people wanted to try, and comfort levels are different with everyone, and yeah, for there was a long time where I was a little bit uncomfortable, like doing voices as a player and a GM, but I slowly grew out of that. Now I'm doing all sorts of voices, sometimes not even realizing it. Oof. But
Yeah,
how long?
I think it's a matter of just sort of relaxing a little bit and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be okay with being silly. Maybe some people here will be laughing at me, maybe some people will be laughing with me, but I'm just going to pretend that they're all laughing with me and we're just going to have fun with it."
Yeah. So it's like getting over stage fright, basically.
Sure.
Yeah. So, anyways, back to the question at hand: how long a campaign should last? Um, yeah, I don't have any hard set date, but there are times where you've defeated the big bad, and your characters have a lot of loot, and maybe it's time to move on from those characters and like find a new like big evil in the world, or start with like a new fresh group and have them go at it. Um,
Yeah, I
per,
guess it's one of those questions. It just totally depends on who's sitting around the table.
yeah,
Like, I know some guys that are like, I am a GM. I have the most fun doing that. I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to play a single character. I want to play all of the other characters. Like, you guys, you're playing your one character and you're playing your other character, and I'm playing everybody else, and that's the most fun for me. And for those kind of people, I can see them saying, I'm just going to keep this campaign going until it reaches its natural logical conclusion. But that's a rare person. I don't know too many people like that. Most of the people that I game with, it's like, well, this guy has been running the game for a while and he's really been enjoying it and we've all been enjoying it. And somebody else might say, I'd like to try that sometime. And, well, okay, well, let's help you learn how to run a game. And we're all friends here. It's a nice, casual, easy environment. Let's have some fun with it. And if somebody runs a game and 6 months later they're like, this isn't going so well, let's just wrap it up, and everybody's left hanging on the edge of a precipice with their characters, well, that's fine too.
yeah,
You know, get back to the other campaign, or everybody makes new characters and tries it with a third game master. That's fine.
and it's important to find that fine balance, like before either the players get burnt out or the GM gets burnt out, because ending a campaign where either side are just they can't do it anymore just because they're so fatigued from it. It's not a good place to end. I've ended a couple campaigns way earlier on where it's like, yeah, I can't stand running this game anymore. I have to just stop. And usually that's when bad feelings start to form toward like that group, and on both sides, unfortunately, because especially when the person who's running the game stops having fun, it usually is a domino effect to the players stop having fun too.
Sure. most of the games that I've been a part of over the years have terminated unexpectedly with, whether it was the game master is just like, I work, things changed at work and I can't do this anymore, or I'm burned out, or hey, my wife and I are expecting, or or whatever it might be, and games just terminate. And from my perspective, when I'm making a character, I like to bear in mind that maybe I'll get this character up to level 6, maybe up to level 8, um, but I'm just going to have fun every step of the way, and maybe this campaign will run through to a nice conclusion and wrap it up with a bow, and it's done. But odds are good that's not going to happen. Odds are good it's going to be we're moving on to something else now.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to set a goal for yourself because it's summer vacation and you want to get that like campaign done within that like few months.
Sure.
And I've ran campaigns like that over summer vacation where it's like, okay, yeah, there's a big evil in the world and we have X amount of sessions to take care of it. Let's see how far we get.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, it's like having a really like story based driven like, okay guys, we only have so many sessions to get this done. It's not stressful, but you really have to be on top of, you have to have control over the table, which some people do excellent. Wow, English. Some people do really well, and other people, you know, some people don't really have that much control over their table.
Go with the flow.
Yeah, go with the flow mostly. Um, it's yeah, but I wish, sometimes I wish I had a definite answer for how long a campaign should last, but it's usually go with the flow. Especially if you're doing that good, bad, and ugly at the end of your sessions, you should get a pretty good feel like where your players are standing with, what's happening in the game, and if the things that are happening currently in the game are actually working for them or not.
A campaign that, well, I'll say it's an ongoing campaign. In one of the regular games that I play in, occasionally the guy that's running the game isn't able to make it, and sometimes I'll say, well, okay, I've got something I can fill in for next week if you're not able to run it. But in doing that, I have to realize that I might I might run that game session and not run another one for 4 or 6 months with that same group of characters. And so my goal in putting this together was to make it entirely episodic. When we start a game, I say, well, it's going to be 3 hours, and at the end of 3 hours, I want to get you guys through whatever this adventure is that we're facing, because it's going to have to be an episode unto itself, because I'm not expecting anybody to remember much of what was going on mid mid thought if we're not playing again in that same setting for another 3 6 months, whatever it might be. So an episodic campaign is another way to look at it, where, like Star Trek the original series, every episode is encapsulated and then done and on to the next one next time.
Yeah, and personally, I kind of like running games like that, anyways. Even with full term, that every session there's some kind of purpose. There's always something happening. Even if it's like, okay, this is the aftermath of you guys fighting the bandits, and you're just trying to get to point A to point B, which was actually the last episode that we have of Tales of Swordfall. And I was just like, okay, we're gonna have some things happen, And since the group is also learning, introduce a few more rules to them. Like we introduced a curse item, and we were trying to figure out what the player wanted to do. If they wanted to find a person who could remove the curse from them or not, etc., etc. If they wanted to live with that like cursed item until like the end of their adventure, stuff like that, and it was pretty interesting. Um, but running games, like each game is episodic, is fun, but it's not for like every single like person who runs game out there. It can be pretty hard to think of, oh yeah, like what's gonna happen this session, how I'm gonna make it interesting, etc., etc.
Well, and I think it requires a certain amount of not only time management and planning, but a certain amount of ability to be flexible and to roll with the punches. Because when the characters do something that you're not expecting, you need to be able to find a way to work with that so that you can have a smooth conclusion to the game session. In some way where it's the end of this chapter of the story. Otherwise, it gets rather hectic. So yeah, I think in some ways it's easier to do it that way because you can be thinking this is this one capsule that I'm working with, but in other ways it's harder because have you have the tools in order to be able to conclude that in a timely fashion, and hopefully in an interesting fashion as well.
Oh yeah. Um, I forgot
Shall we move
what I
on to
was
your
going to
next
say.
question?
Yeah, let's go on to the next question.
Okay. I think you were at.
Uh,
Do you find a setting, building a world? Is that the one you were on?
yeah, do you find a setting or build a world, then fit the campaign in that, or do you find the campaign and dictate the do you let the campaign actually dictate the world and settings? It's one of those questions of, I guess it's really where you start first. If you make the world first and then have the campaign spring from that, or if you make the campaign and build the world to fit that campaign.
Hmm. Um, for me, it's going to be more of a fluid response because what I have done in the past has been a matter of I am generating a constant flow, a steady stream of ideas. And when a player or a group of players interact with those ideas, the ideas change and new ideas spring up out of that. Sometimes those new ideas are my own, sometimes those new ideas come from other people at the table. So from my perspective, if I was thinking, well, okay, they're going to go over this mountain and it's going to be the ocean is out there, and somebody says, oh, I wonder if maybe it'll be a desert because I've always wanted to play in a desert. And I'm like, of course it's a desert there. There's no ocean. So you got to be ready to switch things up.
Yeah.
That's my style.
Um, I kind of do that, and also I have a large random table that I made myself for just random things to happen while people are traveling. So uh, a lot of common things of like, oh, you're running into like a group of merchants, but then I have like things that can pop up like towns and graveyards, cliff sides, and giant statues, and I'm like, okay, you're encountering this monolithic statue. What is it? Someone, does it have any importance to the area, etc., etc. And sometimes it can lead to Oh yeah, that statue is to commemorate the um, battlegrounds that we are stepping on, and it's like, oh, and well, it's becoming evening. Do you guys want to camp here? And if they say yes, that that can lead to things like having ghosts apparent, or zombies, or things that you didn't really expect at that time. And it's a new check on the the expanding map of, yeah, there's ghosts here, or even like being able to explore what consequences that battle had within the rest of your world.
That's interesting. That reminds me of there's a friend of mine. His name is Tyler, and he's just a brilliant game master and an excellent player. And ever since he was a child, he's been inventive with coming up with games. That might be something to do with being an only child. But in a game he was running, a campaign he was running, he came up with a travel system, and he made a deck of cards, and every day of travel he would have one of the players draw one of the cards, and it was his way of coming up with a randomized ish event. Now I say ish because he could, you know, set the deck so that these are the kinds of things I want happening here. Um, but they would draw the card, and it might be a bandit encounter. And on the card, you'd pull it out, and he had a little graphic that he'd drawn on there. It would say, "You are ambushed by a group of bandits. DC 3d6 plus level intimidate. A success avoids combat." That way, the 3d6 plus your level for your intimidate means that as you gain levels, the card can still be effective, whether you're talking about a second level group of characters or a 15th level group of characters. The DCs that he set on all of the cards um, worked out really well, so that sometimes it was I'll avoid that encounter, and sometimes it's gonna be a fight.
That's pretty
So he had
nifty.
Yeah, he has all kinds. I mean, he had this big, thick deck of cards, and every time we'd go there, he'd like added another 20 cards to it, and it was bad weather or hunting grounds. Some of them were things to slow you down. Some of them were things to give you an opportunity for a combat encounter. Some of it were things for increasing your rations, or maybe your rations were spoiled, or maybe you got lost on the trail, or you know, and he would always come up with different ways to. He was playing with a fatigue system,
Hmm.
so when you're traveling, he would say, "Well, you're out on the road, and you, if you stop for a full day of rest, then you can regain any levels of fatigue that you might have accumulated from these cards, um, or maybe." You run out of rations halfway through, and then you've got to spend a couple of days hunting. Or I don't know, it was great. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome. Actually, it sounds a lot like my r- random random table of random
Yeah.
tables. Um, Basically, it's based off of the person who's scouting, and they'll do a survival roll, and then based off that, it's a lot of random things that can happen. And I have it separated into discoveries, which includes like towns, landmarks, whatever. Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
Travel. Huh?
he liked the idea from, I think it was 4E, about skill checks,
Oh
and
yeah,
so he would pull those in on the cards. Some of them were skill checks, some of them weren't.
yeah.
But what I liked about this as compared to a random table, even though this was a lot more work, was that he's putting it in the hands of the player. Here's your deck of cards. You do the drawing rather than me rolling the dice. And it made the players feel as though they were a little bit more involved in creating the encounters.
Yeah. Mine is basically it. I don't even know what's going to happen, so it kind of puts me on the spot of going, oh, okay. Uh, there's a river that has just washed out the bridge, and all there's left is this ruined bridge that you guys will have to find a way around or through the river, you know. And I'll actually have DC checks with all that are sort of random. Well, no, they are random within the actual table. So it's and then it gets added because more things can actually be added to it. Like not only is there that bridge that's washed out, but there's a troop of bards that are trying to cross too. Do you want to help the bards out, or are you gonna help yourselves out? You know, things like that can occur.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's
Make it interesting.
yeah, it gets pretty interesting what actually happens through that. Um, and what actually occurs. One time there, I was using I originally developed this for my Sunday game, which was originally a open world, but also it was a open table. Anyone could join at any time. So I had groups in it, like lots of different people joining at different times, and it was pretty fun. And that's where I kind of got the whole exercise on doing episodic and one shots for sessions. But one of the random things that got rolled off that chart was um, the group came along a mushroom patch, and coiled around all the mushrooms were poisonous snakes. And I really couldn't make heads or tails of it, but I was like, okay, what's the significance of this? And I asked one of the players, and they basically said it was a sign from one of the gods in the human pantheon that there was good fortune near. I'm like, oh, okay.
Sure, why not?
Yeah. Like poisonous snakes around mushrooms? Sure. Um, but going back to the actual question, fitting a world to a campaign or making the world fit to the campaign. I think I just said the same thing, but um, I'm I'm kind of the same way with the whole the campaign as the world builds with the world.
Sure.
Yeah, and but you know there are so many different ways to do both world building and campaign building. Um, but if you're starting out, look at examples or run examples like the starter set of D&D 5e, the Minds of oh, what's the word? I know it starts with a P. But the starter set of D&D 5e, that's a good place to start if you have no idea about it, like how to balance a campaign or like how to balance fights or anything like that. Like looking at examples, the Dungeon Master Guild is full of adventures that people have written up. Some of them better than others. Also, some of the books that Wizards of the Coast has published, they are good. Like they have a lot of good ideas in them. They have a lot of good scenarios and a lot of interesting NPCs. Are you still there?
Yeah, you're breaking up pretty bad, so
Oh,
I figured you might still be talking. I wasn't going to interrupt.
okay. Yeah, I will have to make sure that I am doing okay.
Well, it
Oops.
was perfectly fine before we started streaming, and after that it slid, but that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm just hoping that this it's okay on the internet. We'll just have to find out. Um. Yeah, I just went through a whole rant about looking for examples on the Dungeon Master Guide or picking up adventure modules if you don't know exactly where to start.
Are adventure modules a worthwhile tool?
I think they are, especially if you're looking for a specific setting. Like I'm a big fan of Ravenloft and Bavaria and all that spooky gothic horror stuff. And I thought the adventure module was a like well written enough to like pick up and get ideas from. Um, I haven't really looked at the Sword Coast. Um, I've heard a few things about it that haven't been so good, but like if you don't want to do the Wizards of the Coast stuff, the Dungeon Master Guild has a lot of examples. Also, like going to a gaming shop and picking up like even one of the older adventures that uh, the floppy adventures that they have for like advanced Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, it gives you a pretty good idea of like atmosphere and maybe not balancing for your current system, but how to present a lot of stuff.
Yeah, the only challenge I've had with modules in the past is, let's say you've got a 40-page booklet or PDF, as the case may be. In order for you to run that, you kind of have to have some familiarity with every aspect that your players might interact with in a given session, which can be a little intimidating for some people, especially newer players and game masters, in that you've got this thing and you end up getting stuck in it with, I'm now reading the text out of the box instead of just flowing with it. So I don't know. I mean, for some people, I guess it can be absolutely wonderful because they don't have to think about anything. And for other people, I think it can be a little bit stifling because they're forced to think about the specific things that are on those pages rather than feeling a little bit more free to move forward with what they think might be a good encounter.
That is true. Um, yeah, and I'm one of those people who like picks up an adventure module and I'm like, oh, I can fiddle with this and this and this, and when I'm ready to actually run that module, it's sort of the same.
Okay, so modules can be a good tool. What other tools do you find are useful, beneficial, helpful in building a campaign and populating your world?
Um, Tools. Uh, there's a bunch of tools out there, especially now with the internet being the way it is. Um, there are a few tools and go-to things that I usually use. Um, I think the hardest thing for me ever that I always use tools for is names. Like sometimes I just can't think of a good name, especially if I'm like going on the spot. Um, once in a while I get like 5 NPCs named Bill because the name like Agathar wasn't in my head at that moment. So I use like random naming generators. They help. One of the ones that has a lot of stuff on it is called Seventh Sanctum, um, and they have everything from uh, elf names to tavern names to even like evil group names. And some of the results are really good, and some of them are just downright stupid. But sometimes even a dumb name is a memorable name.
Huh.
Um, Other things are like having a campaign and like that in the next session that your campaign's going to take you through a village because your scout saw the village through the telescope and you're like, okay, that's our next destination. Coming up with maps on the fly can be also hard. So map generators shoot, what is the one that I now go to? It's called. It's the medieval fantasy generator. fantasycities.watabou.ru. Um,
Sorry, Fantasy City dot.
so fantasy cities dot watabou.ru. It's a random city generator. It does small, medium, and large cities. You can put rivers in the map, coastlines, lots of roads, city walls, etc. If you're a very visual person and you need to describe a city, but you don't have like a map in front of your face at that moment, going to that website and hitting the random generate has it is really useful in my opinion.
You should throw a link to that in the doobly doo underneath
Oh
the
yeah,
video.
definitely gonna throw that in the doobly doo. Um, also Seventh Sanctum. Also, if you just need a bunch of like random characters that are somewhat okay for encounters, or even if you're just like, well, okay, I haven't really thought of the tavern owner. There is a website. Where is that sucker? Excuse me while I go through.
Looking that up, I will mention fantasynamegenerators.com, which you can throw that in the doobly doo too. I'll send the link to you right after we're done here, because they have thousands of different names that you can pull from. You could say, well, I want fantasy names, real names, place names, other names, pop culture names. I mean, it doesn't have to be fantasy, it can be futuristic. You can say, hey, I want to generate a haiku. I want to generate a motto. I want to generate a drink name, a disease name, name for some jewelry. It just doesn't stop.
Wow.
They've got lots of stuff on there.
And that could be, you are trying to think of like a MacGuffin for your campaign. That would really help.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, the website I'm thinking of is called RPG Tinker, and it makes NPCs on the fly. You can make barmaids, barkeeps, aristocrats, all the D&D 5e races. You can pick what array spread they have, so how the character is balanced, how many hit dice they have, etc. And it it's really efficient and
Oh, that's quick too. I just typed it in and bam, I've got a character made.
yeah, and it names them. It's a
Yep.
wonderful site, especially if you're like doing running a game by the seat of your pants. I've only had one or two questionable generations, but from a random generator, only having two out of like the 50, 60 times I've used it, it's pretty good.
Hmm. Now, it would be shameful if I didn't mention Don John as a D&D resource tool.
Oh,
Are you familiar with it?
I'm super familiar with that site.
Okay, yeah, then I don't need to tell you, but for anybody else that might be listening, it's DONJON, and again, Paul will put a link down underneath here. And they just have, I mean, you can say, well, uh, what do you pick out of somebody's pocket? And you just make that roll, and in seconds, you've got like, there's a bit of cork and a little bit of coin, and a piece of paper with some writing on it. And you can also say, well, what might that writing be? And it might be a grocery list, or it might be a poem from a love interest, or a poem to a love interest. they've got like all kinds of stuff on Donjon, including encounter size generator and spell sheets and monster lists and names, and you can just generate your entire campaign if you wanted to
Oh
in
yeah, it's
Donjon, where you could say, hey, what do I want for a campaign? And it could say, well, it's going to be this kind of a setting, and it's going to be that kind of, and here's the bad guy's name, and here's his henchman's name. And it's just massive. It's fantastic,
and
especially for generating ideas.
if it's done by one person, I want to meet this person because it's an amazing site, and I'm always impressed whenever they add a new feature or I think they recently updated it so like things from Xanathar's Guide is actually in there. So I'm pretty impressed how updated it is for especially 5e and what they have in there. It is if there's like one tool to take away from like any of this, it would be Donjon.
Yep.
Um,
Yep, definitely.
and one last tool I've been finding really useful, especially for like balancing fights, is Kobold Fight Club.
Yep, that is the next one on my list too.
Yeah, I mean, Donjon does an uh, okay job at like doing the whole encounter balance fight thing, but there's something about the user interface of Kobold Fight Club that I prefer more, and also it like shows you just. I think part of it is it's color coded according to like how dangerous the encounter is too. I think that really helps.
Yeah, well, and it fills in some of the gaps. Like Donjon isn't perfect. It's amazing, but it is not perfect.
No.
But Cobalt Fight Club, like you can take on Donjon and you can say, well, okay, I've got my monster list, I've got my encounter size calculator, but it's just missing out something in that it's kind of you're cross-referencing on tables, but then with Cobalt Fight Club, it can say, well, here, this is exactly what you need to fill in that gap. And those two tools together are fantastic for pulling stuff together.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any more useful tools other than just like random sites that I use. I have a bookmark folder of just things I have found over the years, from like maze generators to like um, a glossary of riddles to yeah, I love the riddles. Also, gosh, what is it? To um, portrait makers, because just sometimes your players want to know what this character like looks like in your opinion, and if you need to make a portrait on the fly, um, I I've actually been using this for my SwordFall game for all the icons that people have been seeing, especially in our intro video. It's from a website called Rinmaru Games. Um, I'm probably butchering that name so much, but I'll put it down in the dibbly doo. They have one specifically called the Mega Fantasy Avatar Creator, and it does a decent, very decent job of getting your idea of your character just out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also like for building characters, the D&D wiki has backgrounds because they can only put so much in the book, and they made it clear in the player's handbook that this is a list to stimulate thought. but on the D&D wiki, with their background list, there's adventurers and afflicted and alchemists and alcoholics and amnesiacs. It's an alphabetical list, obviously.
Yeah.
Writers, zealots, slayers, smugglers, spies, islander, jester, engineer, envoy, exile. It just goes on and on and on.
And
And
it
again,
it's a
all
good
of them are
way.
fantastic for pulling ideas.
Yeah, and it's a good way to flesh out your king. Maybe he's actually in exile, and so he has certain like traits and quirks that make him a little bit offstandish, but that's because he's missing his homeland. Or I had a character and I was using from I think their witch hunter and their slayer, kind of a combination of those two, and as a character. And I had this guy who was pretty much the main character from The Witcher. In the end, not so supernatural. He was just a human, but he was still a pretty cool character.
Nice.
Um, yeah.
Well, and that's something else that Xanathar's Guide has done well and has been a good tool for is character background stuff,
Yeah.
which again isn't just good for your player character that you're making. It's also good for the NPC. That not every NPC can be somebody significant, um, but if you throw a name generator in behind you, then every NPC might be somebody significant if they have a name.
Yep.
But if all of your NPCs are nameless and then they run into that one guy that has a name, the players are going to know that's the guy they need to talk to. So I like to keep them on their toes.
Yeah. I mean, it takes just the baker in town to Miller, the baker. You know, oh yeah, let's go back to Miller. He has all like breads. Let's buy some bread. I know that especially as a player, that if a shopkeeper has a name, I'm more likely to go to that shopkeeper instead of going to, oh yeah, I just want to go to the guy who sells precious stones.
And you never know what your players are going to come up with. If you've given them a place that they can hang their hat, as far as an NPC that they can interact with, because if they're going back to that baker, then that's another opportunity for social interaction, which means another opportunity for something to go sideways on them, and more adventure can happen.
Oh yeah, like one day the baker can't bake because the mill that he gets his flour from is infested with goblins, and thus your characters are invested in helping this dude, maybe, uh, and you have a little like story arc right there, helping your favorite baker get flour again.
It seems like a good thing.
Yeah, I mean it helps that town and the economy too.
Cool. Any other tools that you want to wrap up with?
uh, no, I think that's a really good list of tools right there. I mean that is, if I was telling anyone who's starting out as a GM any set of tools, those are the top ones in my opinion. Other than like
Nice.
getting the Dungeon Master Guide, stuff like that, because the Dungeon Master Guide has, well, if you want random charts on towns and governments and what the town wall is like, that's in there.
Sweet.
Yep. So yeah, let's wrap this up. Because it's been about an hour and a half, and that's about times I stop this. So once again, I am Paul. This is my YouTube channel, Tales of SwordFall. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you hear, or heard, I should say, we do this live chat every other Monday, so that means our next one is the 5th of, is that April? March. Wow. Scared myself for a moment. Whew. Yeah. So the next one will be at 5th of March, 7:30 Pacific, at night, of course. And follow me on the Twitter at Paul_Garish. I follow this channel, Tales of Swordfall, at Swordfall D&D, the actual letters D and D. Or also you can find us on Facebook under the same thing, and I think also Google Plus. Go for it, Dwayne.
Yeah, I'm Dwayne, no one of consequence, so no point following me. But I may join Paul again for another conversation at some time in the future. It's been a pleasure, Paul.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's so nice to meet you and hear your opinions and interact with you on a more vocal level than how we usually go.
Then text on a Facebook group? Yes.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, good night, everyone. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.